What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and before we get into this video, just a quick little statement here. Buddy of mine, Vince, is going to be competing in the World Air Hockey Championships this coming weekend, and the champion himself is actually going to be streaming on his YouTube channel. So I'll post a link in the description. Make sure you guys check it out, and let's get into the video. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and as promised, we are back with part 2 of Gerry Duggan's X-Men run. Now, after this, that's when we start basically the whole X-Men versus Avengers versus Eternals Judgment Day event, which is amazing. It's an absolutely amazing story. So here's the thing, right? Like I said in the last video that we were going to split X-Men in two because this one starts to deal with Nightmare and then kind of picks up with a few other things, Feilong and stuff like that. We'll talk about them as time goes on. But what this does is it initially joins up with the idea of Nightmare. Now, this is something that we almost never see in Marvel Comics, and in fact, I can't really think of a single instance where Nightmare specifically targeted the X-Men. It's not to say he didn't, I just can't think of one off the top of my head. But the thing about this is it's really just kind of picking up with the idea of the X-Men having their own individual dreams, nightmares, things like that, so on and so forth. So like Cyclops, when he experienced the whole thing with his brother Havoc, or really Alex, when they were basically thrown out of the burning plane by their parents, basically his origin from way back in the day. Just all these small little moments here. Even Jean Grey is having these dreams and nightmares when she was the Dark Phoenix and incinerated all these innocent people and so on and so forth. And all of it's being observed by Nightmare himself. Now, I'm not gonna lie here, guys. Like, it is a little strange to see Nightmare going after the X-Men, but it is cool. And it actually makes perfect sense when you think about it, because the X-Men have had some of the most tragic experiences of anybody in the superhero community. It's kind of a small wonder that Nightmare hadn't gone after them earlier. And in fact, it's really him just sort of relishing in these nightmares that they're having, using them to imbue himself with enhanced power and kind of focusing on them. Not only that, it's actually focusing on the dreams between Cyclops and Jean, in the sense of Cyclops himself having basically had a telepathic affair with Emma Frost, you know, when Jean Grey was still around, and then of course eventually leaving Emma Frost and going back to Jean, and so on and so forth, right? It's just one of these things where time and time again, they've experienced these horrible things, emotionally, mentally, physically, and so on and so forth, that have gone on to have a significant impact on their lives in terms of how they see the world. And it's one of those things, if I'm being honest with you guys, it's one of those things where in modern day X-Men storytelling, you don't really see it that often, right? What Gerry Duggan's doing here, kind of touching on this idea of Nightmare, focusing on the emotional turmoil that the X-Men have endured over the course of their existence, this is Chris Claremont stuff. This is the kind of stuff that Claremont used to do. I mean, some writers have done this, but Chris Claremont's run was very much things like this. Not so much with Nightmare, but focusing more on the interpersonal relationships of the X-Men, the individual struggles they went through, and the emotional toll that it takes being a member of the mutant community out there in the world. Another part of this is he focuses on X-23, on Laura Kinney, who also has a very tragic past. Now, this is where things get cool, because in the midst of all this, suddenly Nightmare's awakened, just kind of jolted by this force that turns out to be Jean Grey. Now, this is an important distinction that I want to make here, right? This is a very important thing that I want to establish here. This is one of those moments in Marvel Comics when a writer is coming along and they're modifying what a character is capable of. A lot of what we've seen Jean Grey do regarding her telepathy, her telekinesis, even when she was in possession of the Phoenix Force and how powerful the Phoenix Force is in and of itself, is usually extrapolation or direct action. So an extrapolation is, for example, when Rachel Summers, the daughter of Cyclops and Jean from the Days of Future Past timeline, came to the present day, had the Phoenix Force, and then like fought Galactus. That's one of those things when it's kind of like, okay, Jean could probably do the same thing and fight Galactus to a standstill. I think Galactus started feeding on the Phoenix Force, so Rachel had to run away, but the thing about it is, like, you can sort of extrapolate that. More direct actions are Jean Grey with the Phoenix facing off and becoming like the White Phoenix of the Crown, right? Like this multiversal force that exists out there. So you can kind of look at this scenario with Nightmare and look at it in two separate ways, but this is just simply Jean Grey by herself, absent the power of the Phoenix. But lest we forget, she is an Omega level telepath and telekinetic. And that's one of the things that I love about what Gerry Duggan's doing here, where she's essentially going toe to toe with Nightmare, and in fact actually overpowering Nightmare in making this case and saying, you have no sway against me, right? There's literally a point where he starts riding around and just feeding on the nightmares of all these people and imbuing himself with more and more power, but Jean's still able to overpower him. Because when it comes to things like Omega level mutants and so on and so forth, one of the big things that Marvel does is they largely keep it compartmentalized, right? Like, there's a new Omega level mutant there. You don't really see them like face off against the Avengers or something like that, right? Like overpower the entirety of the Avengers themselves, especially when it comes to like cosmic entities. Name a time when you saw an Omega level mutant face off against somebody like Eternity. You can count it on one hand. So you don't really see this kind of thing often. Seeing an Omega level mutant like Jean Grey go toe to toe against Nightmare and then overpower him really gives us this kind of broad perspective of just how far reaching her power is, how capable she is, and how she compares to other people. And so this is one of those times when you're going to see this story like this used in like battles on forums, or when someone's referencing the power of an Omega level mutant, right? Like Jean Grey once overpowered Nightmare, right? So it'll be like one of those respect threads that you see going on. You'll see this kind of thing pop up in the future when it comes to different forms and depictions of what Omega level mutants are capable of. But the thing about this is that what it does is it actually picks up with a guy by the name of Feilong. Now Feilong is a person who had been contacted by Henry Peter Gyrich, who is part of Orchis. Now Orchis is something that we haven't really talked about recently, and in fact it was a main focal point of Jonathan Hickman's X-Men run. The long and short of this is that Orchis is basically the most recent iteration of a government-backed, or really just kind of an organization that uses government resources to target the mutant population and to try to destroy them, right? It's a very simplified explanation of them, but that's basically what they are. But unlike things like Friends of Humanity or the Right, or even like the federal government with Project Wide Awake, that Orchis utilizes resources from a host of different things. So Orchis is composed of people from Hydra and Advanced Idea Mechanics, and even people like Henry Peter Gyrich who work for the federal government, just things like that. So it's really kind of a more modern day depiction of Project Wide Awake, but in a more expanded capacity insofar as who is a part of it, who's joined this whole organization. But for Feilong himself, he's kind of a villain, but not really. But the idea behind Feilong, and kind of a difference between him and a lot of other people, is that Feilong was a guy who at like 13 years old had graduated like summa cum laude or magna cum laude from like MIT. He was a genius, but it was one of those things where, in effect, the different campaigns that he had gone on, which were largely heroic, they were good campaigns, he was basically beaten to the punch by the X-Men. So an example of this was to essentially terraform Mars and to turn Mars into a place that could be used for like human occupation. The X-Men beat him to it. And so because of the fact that the X-Men were always sort of beating him to the punch, which would lead to like his own personal failures, essentially, he started targeting the X-Men, started going after them. So again, he's not really a true villain so much as really, again, kind of a Chris Claremont era character who hates the X-Men because they've just kind of screwed him over. But one of the things he does is, in order to ensure that he can terraform Mars, he had basically modified his body to adapt to the Mars environment, which also gave him the ability to tap into cosmic energies. Now, it doesn't make him some massive, ridiculously OP guy. Well, it actually kind of does, and we'll find out why here in a minute. But from this point, what we end up doing is actually kind of picking up, again, these kind of last three issues for 4, 5, and 6 actually kind of jump between individual stories for individual characters. So they're really more filler stories going into Judgment Day, but this basically switches over to the character of Polaris, of Lorna Dane. Now, one of the things to know about Lorna Dane is she's always had a kind of on-again, off-again relationship with the X-Men. One of the more notable roles that she had in Marvel Comics is when she was part of X-Factor back in the 1990s, which I would argue is probably the best role she had. In truth, ever since then, Lorna Dane's just kind of free-floated from like one group to the next, and Marvel never fully knew what to do with her character, which is actually kind of cool because it gives us a chance to see her character in different scenarios and situations that we wouldn't normally see had Marvel found a specific place for her. But the thing about this is that in the midst of this fight against the Reavers, which, by the way, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with them, in the old Uncanny X-Men stories, the Reavers initially started out as basically cybernetic henchmen of the Hellfire Club. The Reavers have just kind of been this looming ongoing threat that were really, really prominent in the 1980s and then stopped being important later on. I mean, they were kind of a big deal during X-Men the Animated Series and as far as the comics went because they were popular in the show. But by the time you got to like the mid to late 1990s, they were just this long forgotten concept that existed, and they would pop up from time to time, but they would never matter. The important thing here is they're small time, right? Like at the moment, they're basically working for a government and they're looking to do what goes on there where they make life hell for mutants in that location and so on and so forth. And so the X-Men are kind of responding here, right? It's just sort of what the X-Men are doing at this point in time. The reason why this matters is because for the character of Lorna Dane, one of the things she does is because you have adamantium in the body of X-23, albeit not laced to her skeleton per se, but more just the claws that she has, that what you have is Lorna Dane who literally uses her body as a puppet and basically goes after the individual members of the Reavers and basically kind of takes them out. Now, of course, what also ends up happening here is you basically have her working alongside, or really just kind of dealing dealing with this giant nuclear meltdown that goes on. She kind of saves that. It's a lot of like quick little events that happen in succession, but the larger reason why this matters, and the bigger reason why it's important here, is because even after the defeat of the Reavers, with her basically using X-23 as a bit of a puppet, is because during the Hellfire Gala, when the various mutants who were there were voting telepathically on who the next X-Men roster was going to be, or who was going to be on the next team, Lorna Dane was just kind of like, please not me. And that Jean Grey had actually modified her thoughts to say, yes, I want to be on the team. So Lorna Dane was basically thrown on the new X-Men team. The reason why this is important is because she's always been a character who has been a little unsure of herself and what her role is. And that's why Polaris has been as much a villain as a hero in Marvel Comics, because the way her character has been written over the years is that on a personal level, her loyalties shift because she doesn't quite know where she stands. She's kind of like an in-comic book variation of how she resides in the publishing landscape of, we just don't know what to do with this chick, right? That's basically what it is here. And so that's when you have this conversation that takes place between Jean Grey and Polaris, where she asks the question like, why did you mess up my thoughts to put me on this team, right? Like, why did you do that? And the response of Jean is, because you need the X-Men as much as the X-Men need you, is really what this is. And the reality here is that your initial thought was, I want to be on the X-Men, but then you talked yourself out of it with your second thought, which was, please not me. So I went with your original impulse. And the reality is that Jean Grey's right here, right? I mean, this is one of the reasons why Jean Grey in the modern era of X-Men storytelling is so much better than she used to be, because the truth is that she's just wildly intriguing, right? Like, she's just wildly fascinating, and she plays a far more prominent role than she used to, really outside of the Phoenix Force. It's why I tell people all the time, right? People ask me my thoughts on Jean, and I say, look, in the old Stan Lee, Jack Kirby run, she sucked. During the Chris Claremont era, she was amazing until she died, which was about, I'd say about 60 or so issues into his run. And then in turn, she came back as part of X-Factor. She was kind of cool a little bit, but the truth about it is that with the exception of stories like X-Men Here Comes Tomorrow, or like Phoenix End Song and War Song, or something like that Jean Grey had not had a significant run or significant value to the X-Men for quite some time. This really changes a lot of things in terms of how she looks. So that's one of the things that I do love about this, but she is also accurate in talking to Polaris about this, which is, you need to be on the X-Men, right? You need to be a part of this team because you need a sense of belonging. That's what you lack. You lack that sense of belonging. You lack that sense of purpose. Like, you don't really feel like anybody wants you, but the X-Men do. And this will give you the feeling of family that you've never really had, and a place to belong. So it is a cool thing, right? This is really more about the evolution of Polaris than anything else. The big thing that comes into play here, right? The big thing that matters here is the character of Captain Krakoa. Now, here's the thing. All the allusions here put forward the idea that Captain Krakoa is a massively powerful Omega level character. We will get his origin, right? We will actually get the origin of Captain Krakoa. But it's one of those cool things where basically there's like a cat stuck in a tree, and Captain Krakoa just kind of shows up and then rescues this cat. And like, that's basically it. But Captain Krakoa has the ability to fly and all that kind of stuff. Now, of course, flying does not necessarily elevate him to Omega level status, right? Like, I mean, like, imagine that, right? Like, beyond Omega level, anybody who has the ability to fly, right? Like, it doesn't really work that way. But the things he does, right, is basically manipulating what is in effect the Krakoan island itself. And that's where a lot of the potential beyond Omega level perception comes from, or at least seems to come from, is because the island of Krakoa is itself an Omega level thing, right? It's a giant landmass. It can never truly be destroyed, right? Like, it provides life and all kinds of stuff. It's not your traditional depiction of an Omega level being, right, where it's just ridiculously powerful and can like alter reality or anything like that, but it still falls in that vein. The thing to understand here, though, is that we're basically experiencing what is essentially a 6-day time gap. Now, we're not told explicitly what happens in this 6-day time gap, but what we are told is this, that Ben Urich, right, the reporter that we talked about in the previous video that we had lightly glossed over, that the reason why we kind of postponed it to this video is that what Ben Urich has been doing is investigating Krakoan resurrection, because that's one of the things to know. The world itself does not know that X-Men have the ability to resurrect each other, right? They don't know that. They don't know that when an X-Man or a mutant dies, they can be resurrected in Krakoa. And a lot of that's because whenever mutants die, they usually die on some kind of a mission away from prying eyes. It's in secret or something like that. And that's effectively it. No one knows that they have the ability to resurrect. What Ben Urich has been doing is investigating that, because one of the things that had happened here, that's one of the reasons why we kind of avoided that bit of a time skip, is that Ben Urich had been discovering what were basically the corpses masses of mutants, albeit not necessarily laid everywhere, but discovering mutants that were supposed to have been dead, but were basically walking around. A really good example of this is the grave of Nathan Summers, which was empty. So why bury a man that's not dead? And so Ben Urich, ever the detective, right, ever the journalist, right, ends up coming to this realization that what seems to be going on, and while he doesn't really have any evidence to support it, what seems to be going on is that X-Men have mastered the ability to defy death. They've mastered the ability to resurrect themselves. And that's why he goes to Cyclops and is like, we need to talk about this. And Cyclops is like, there's nothing to talk about. I don't know what you're talking about, right? Like, we don't have the ability to resurrect each other from the dead. And that's even when Ben Urich's like, but I know you can. So what I'll do is I'll give you a few days and I will let you come up with any kind of statement that you want to offer, if you want to offer one, but I've got to go public with this. I can't keep this to myself. This will win me a Pulitzer Prize. The idea that death has been conquered and people can be resurrected, if the world becomes aware of this, they will go after Krakoa explicitly for that, right? Just as much as they would if Krakoa had waged war against the world. Because now what you're talking about is the removal of death. If Krakoa has the ability to resurrect people from the dead, imagine your loved ones, right? Like, politicians will play on that. They'll be like, well, imagine if you could bring back the daughter you lost or the son you lost or something along those lines, albeit vying for power. The average person will go after it because the average person is selfish and they're usually an idiot. So they'll go after it for no other reason than the fact that, like, they just want it, right? It'll just be the most basic human desire, right? I mean, it's, you know, that's kind of how people are, right? It's just the nature of human beings. It doesn't make it okay, but, you know, hey, what are you gonna do? So the thing about this is that Cyclops, of course, kind of shut him down, and then what it ended up happening is that during this 6-day time jump, something took place where Cyclops died. Now, under normal circumstances, the Quiet Council would resurrect him, but they couldn't. And the reason why is because Cyclops' death was public. The whole, like, everybody saw it happen. It was out there, public, in the face of the world. And because Cyclops' death was so public, if he had suddenly just came walking back out again, right, walking around like, hey everybody, it's me, Cyclops, I know you think you saw me die, but, you know, I don't know, magic, people would start asking questions, right? And they'd start asking the wrong kinds of questions. How is it that we could watch this guy die, and then in turn, he comes right back? And the reality here is the Quiet Council is already aware that Ben Urich is trying to find some evidence for this Pulitzer Prize winning article about how the X-Men have conquered death. And all it's gonna take is for that article to come out. People are gonna put 2 and 2 together. They're gonna come after Krakoa, because that's when people are going to definitively know Krakoa conquered death. And so that's why Cyclops is like, I wanna be back on the X-Men. Like, I wanna go back and rejoin the X-Men team. And the response of the Quiet Council is no. You cannot join the X-Men. You cannot be out there in public. People can't know you're alive. Now, the reality here is it's that statement and then ... until we can figure out something to do. But in effect, that's where Captain Krakoa came from, is that it's basically the new superhero mantle of Cyclops. Now, as for how it is that he's able to, like, fly and stuff like that, that's just using Krakoan tech. So he doesn't have, like, a new set of powers. So for all you guys who hate change in comics, don't worry, this is probably only a temporary thing. I know you guys are probably getting ready to fire up your keyboard. I'm tired of Marvel messing with the mutants and derpity derp derp. No, this is probably not gonna be a permanent change. Everything goes back to normal. Calm down, enjoy the ride. Don't forget to have fun when you're reading comics. It's kind of an important part of the whole process. So what this does is it basically switches back over to really to Feilong himself, as well as Sunfire. And the reason why is because Sunfire, of course, basically being on Mars, which, remember, that a portion of the X-Men led by Storm, and this is actually covered in the X-Men Red comic, but a portion of the X-Men led by Storm had basically terraformed Mars, and they literally use it as kind of like a secondary base of operations. But the important thing here is that the desire of Feilong is not necessarily to terraform Mars itself. He can't do that anymore. If you were to show up on Mars and try to start terraforming it, it would literally bring them to war with the X-Men, right? It's like somebody showing up on your backyard and saying, I claim this land in the name of me, right? And, like, taking over your property, which is kind of what happened in North America. But the thing about this is that Feilong ends up basically showing up on Phobos. Now, while again, this is not really Mars proper, it is of concern to the mutant population because it's the equivalent of, like, basically your sworn enemy buying the house across the street from you and spying on you. That's basically what it is, right? It's literally humanity trying to get as close to Araka, which is what they call Mars now, as close to that place as possible without actually conquering it or anything along those lines. And so as soon as Feilong shows up here, Sunfire is the one that's sent to intervene. And the reality here is Feilong's like, I'm here on behalf of, like, Henry Peter Gyrick and the federal government, but you're not talking me out of this, right? It's been my life's ambition to terraform some place outside of Earth in order for for the, for the benefit of humanity, fat lot of good you're gonna do trying to stop me from doing it here. And so what this does is it draws the attention of the citizens of Arakko. Now remember, during Jonathan Hickman's run, that when it came to Arakko and Krakoa, they were at one point a giant landmass, but they had to be separated in order to save the world from its imminent destruction. That was done by Apocalypse. And so when those forces of Arakko basically descended down into their own dimensional area, they stayed there for eons. But during the events of like Ten of Swords and all that stuff during Hickman's run, Arakko and Krakoa were reunited. But the reality is trying to find or trying to maintain some balance between the citizens of Arakko and the citizens of Krakoa really just couldn't be done because they were so starkly different in terms of how they saw things. All people in Arakko knew was war, conflict, and death. The people of Krakoa were promoting peace. So in a lot of ways, it was like the ideology of Magneto versus the ideology of Xavier spread across like two different societies. And so in order to ensure that both forces could coexist at the same time, but they could also maintain their own individual lifestyles or their own place, that what you saw was the people of Arakko who were sent to Mars, and they basically reside there. So that's why you have all these individuals from Arakko from the Ten of Swords event that are basically hanging out. Now, of course, one of them is a guy by the name of Vornak. Now, this is one of those instances where we're kind of introduced to what is essentially a citizen of Arakko that was part of the Arakan group during, like, or at least, the whole time period when they were banished. This is one of those times, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this is one of those times when we're slowly being introduced to characters we didn't know about before. For this guy, it doesn't really matter all that much because when he shows up here, one, Iska kind of puts off this idea that he's already exceedingly powerful, right? Of course, Iska being one of the more significant members of Arakko, but he already has a history of demonstrating just how capable he is. And she even goes as far as to say that, like, songs are sung about your bravery and like your feats, right? Like, you don't really have to go and do this. No one's gonna doubt your bravery. But the reality here is that Vornak, like so many other members of Arakko, really just kind of cherishes combat and violence and destruction, the survival of the fittest, right? Testing his might against the might of others. And if he proves himself to be more powerful than them, it's more of a personal accomplishment as opposed to how everybody else sees it. The kicker to this is that when he shows up to face off against Feilong, that Sunfire initially tries to stop under this fear that if Feilong were to be killed, humanity would take that as an act of war by the mutant population on Mars and then use that to basically launch an assault on the mutant population. So it's more politics than anything else. Fortunately for us, we don't have that problem because despite all the bluster of Vornak and everything that he's capable of, Feilong incinerates him with a blast from his mouth using the cosmic powers that he has. He destroys this guy. And that's literally when at that point Sunfire's like, you have any idea what you've done? Because I've got to tell the X-Men what's happened here. And now they're gonna have to make a choice. Do we let this stand or do we take this as an assault on the mutant population by humanity, right? So are we gonna be inching ever close to war? Is this like the first major shot? Is this what is in effect the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand that launched World War I? Is that what we're seeing here, right? That's the concern of Sunfire because he has no desire to go to war. But the reality here is because of the intelligence of Feilong, within days, he basically terraforms the entirety of Phobos and turns it into what is essentially humanity's foothold out in space. So it gives humanity the ability to spy on Mars, to spy on the mutant population now. And that's what's so crazy about this. Now, as a kind of tail end to this, and this actually goes directly into issue number 7, which is the start of a new arc, essentially the origin of Captain Krakoa, that what happens is that because Cyclops is told by the Quiet Council, if you want to operate as a superhero, you're gonna have to operate as that guy, but you're not going to be able to be Cyclops. And honestly, you shouldn't be going out there anyway. You should not be showing up as any kind of a superhero in any capacity because all anybody has to do is figure out that you're Cyclops, and they have the secret of mutant resurrection, which is why he sneaks in and out of Krakoa. It's really just Captain Krakoa kind of just being a moniker he donned on himself outside the approval of the council. He basically goes to Ben Urich, contacts him and says, hey, I'm a friend of Scott Summers, also known as Cyclops. I heard you're publishing an article about how Krakoans have basically managed to master death. I have some information that might help you on this. So really kind of forcing the hand of the Quiet Council that quite literally, he would dump this information out to the world in order to maintain himself, in order to stay himself, right? Like basically doing whatever it takes to win. Now, what's so crazy about this is Ben Urich responds in a really, really cryptic way where we don't know if something happened to him or if he's simply just pretending. But the response of Ben Urich is, I don't know who Cyclops is. Like, I don't know I don't know your friend. He seems like a really cool guy, but my condolences to the fact that your friend died. Now, there's only one real possibility that I can think of here, and if it is what I think it is, the X-Men are getting nefarious. That with the Quiet Council realizing that Ben Urich is investigating Krakoan resurrection, that potentially what they did is they killed him, and then they brought him back using Krakoan resurrection tech and wiped those memories from him, and probably using a little fiddling from Professor Xavier, put him right back where he was before. So as far as he was aware, he maybe passed out, whatever it is, but he doesn't recall anything, right? Like he doesn't know Cyclops, or at least he doesn't know anything about Krakoan resurrection, whatever that case is. They basically wiped his mind. Maybe it was Xavier just using his telepathic powers, right? But whatever it is, the X-Men are doing everything they can, or at least the Quiet Council is doing everything they can to keep all this covered up. Pretty nefarious stuff. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Again, this is when we start getting into Judgment Day, which I promise, this video, I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of cool, but Judgment Day is really amazing. So thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.